Hi, Ariana. Hi, Giselle. Hi, Nadia. Hi, Walker. Hope everybody's doing well today. Your warm-up question is a little long, but it says, this week I'm asking you to write an essay about how authors use conflict in literature to say something true or universal about culture. Think about that question in terms of your own life. What is a conflict you've experienced? It could be internally with yourself or externally with another person, group, or society. And what lesson did you learn from it? Jake? Okay, Ariana. Hi, Salam. Rosa. Layla. I'll give you guys a minute to think about this, and then I can start calling on folks, or feel free to type if you'd rather do that. Or shout out to start talking. Can you give a specific one, Walker, like a conflict you had and what it taught you about yourself? Giselle, what do you think?
Yeah, I did have a couple like academic problems, like sometimes in middle school. Like I had this problem with myself where I would beat myself up or not getting good enough grades. Like sometimes I'd have like a B on a test when I wanted an A. So yeah, I learned that life isn't made out of grades. Yeah, you can do better next time.
Good. Yeah, like not to judge yourself according to a grade letter, and that it's not really worth beating yourself up with. You can just learn from it and do better next time. That's great. Jake? Looks like Jake's typing. Salam? Okay, keep thinking. Rosa? Conflict I've dealt with was when I was younger, being Mexican American. People would talk about me in Spanish, not knowing that I speak Spanish, but I was afraid or scared of being proud of being Mexican American. So that sounds like you had a conflict both with like some other people and with yourself. What did you learn from that?
I soon learned kind of that you should be proud of like what you are, where you come from. And I mean, when I was younger, I was kind of afraid or shy, I guess. And people would always people thought I was more, I guess, white because they would talk about me not knowing I actually knew Spanish. But I was too afraid to actually say something. And once I started getting older, it kind of changed. I became more proud of being Mexican American and being proud of actually being able to speak Spanish because I've learned throughout my life that it's actually a really cool thing to know two languages. So yeah.
Good. That's a great example. So I feel like that comes up a lot in the text we read too. Like people experience conflict because they're a part of two cultures, and it makes them feel like an outsider in both. But learning, as you grow up, learning that that's actually a really positive, powerful thing to be a part of two cultures or to have two languages. That's a good example. Nadia?
Mine is kind of like Rosa's, that I mix with Mexican and Black, and sometimes I find it hard to fit in with both of my cultures. So, but I've learned that sometimes it's kind of good to not always fit in, I guess. I don't know how to really word it. I guess, I don't know. It's just good to like be different from everything, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think you said it well, actually, that it's a good thing to not fit in. Like, you don't want to be like everybody else.
Yeah.
And that's usually something that it takes some time or growing up to learn. Good. Who else? Layla? Okay, Ariana? Sam? And what did you learn from conflicts with school or trying to grow up or become a young adult? Okay. It's a lot easier to look at, I think, to look at conflicts in hindsight once they're over and figure out what we learned from them. It's harder to see through it when you're in the midst of it. And Aria, what have you learned from your conflicts? Sweet. So Ariana's learned that she's stronger than she thought she was. Jake brought up the transition from into high school is difficult, and he found that people were more judgmental. What have you been able to learn from that? Or what do you take away from that? Layla said, mine is similar to Rose's as well, except it's with my religion. Being Muslim American meant I had to constantly feel like I had to defend myself in my religion. I learned that it requires patience to deal with the type of people that judge based off of what they hear and not necessarily by what they know. Thanks for sharing that, Layla. That's interesting. So you learned that you had to have patience with other people's ignorance. It's kind of unfortunate, but that would be a good lesson. Jake's is kind of similar, that like that's how other people are going to be. I shouldn't let it bother me. It's like learning that you can only control yourself and not other people through some conflicts, perhaps. Okay, and Lisette, do you want to share one? Okay, I'm going to move on. And so obviously I'm just trying to get us to connect your lives and experiences to the work we're doing here in class. Lisette had conflicts at school and learned that online learning is what's best, or what's best for you. So making connections to our own lives, because all these texts, it's not just about reading a text to do an assignment, but all these texts, the author's goal was to say something that they had learned or observed, something true, something profound about conflict or culture. So hopefully you can apply some of those texts to your own life and share all the things you know from your own experience. So we're not really going to work on or talk about the essays today. So before we switch gears from that, does anyone have any questions about your essay or assignments for the week? You can let me know now if you do, or make sure you ask me for help after, or individually if you'd rather do that. And just so you know, I'm going to try to get you feedback on the plans by tomorrow. Don't wait for me on that. Go ahead and do today's work. Start writing your draft and completing that. Help each other out for them. And I hope you'll really take that seriously and use each other and learn from each other to make your essays better, because I'm not the only one who can give feedback. And then I'm just curious, because it takes me a while to look all this up on Infinite Campus. Would you guys tell me real quick what grade you're in? Just everybody, just type your grade level. Okay. That's what I thought. So this is mostly an 11th grade class. So we are going to talk more today about your reading assessments I've been giving you and going over some of those, and some of what we're going to do is going to sound a little test preppy, because it is, to get you ready for the PARCC assessment in a couple of weeks. And the couple of 12th graders in here, you probably won't be taking this if you're a 12th grader by credit, but this all still applies. This is all things you need to know for this class and for the standards. So know that this isn't just test prep. Okay, so these are 2 questions from your reading assessments that you've had in recent weeks. What do these 2 questions have in common? How does the text structure contribute to the selection's meaning? How does this sentence's structure best support the author's claim? Giselle pointed out that these both have the word structure in them. They're both about structure. And the reason I point that out, not only because they both are about structure, but because these are the two questions that more of you missed than any other questions. Like, more students missed these two questions that both have to do with structure. And then when I looked back at your reading assessment reviews, where you had to go back and look at the questions, a lot of students still didn't get that the reason they missed it was because the question was asking about structure, and the answer they chose didn't have to do with structure. But it was like some of you were just reading over the word structure. So today we're going to talk about structure and how to look at it and what that means. So the objective is students will analyze and discuss how the structure and word choice of My Country, the poem you read on Friday, impacts that poem's meaning. So what is structure? What do we mean when we say structure? And you could answer this generally, not just about a text, but just what does the word structure mean? Ariana, what does structure mean? Ariana said it can mean consistency. Giselle said how something is built. Walker said the foundation and building supporting an idea, concept, claim, or a building. Yeah. So here's the official definition. It's the way something is built, ordered, arranged, or organized. So it's how something fits together, how it's held together, the order of something, the arrangement. An outline could hold the structure or give you the structure of something. And so just like, a building is held up by its structure, texts have a structure. So how do you talk about structure? Like if you're looking at a text, what kinds of things can you look at? So let's start at the sentence level. If you were going to talk about the structure of a sentence, what could you talk about? What are you looking at? Sam said diction. So actually, no, you wouldn't look at diction if you were talking about structure, because diction is the choice of words, it's the content. And so that doesn't have to do with structure. It doesn't have to do with the organization or the ordering of things. But instead of diction, so diction is just words, right? Diction is the choice of words. So if you're looking at structure, you're not looking so much at the choice of words, but you might be looking at the placement of those words. So the order of them, like which words or phrases appear first, which words or ideas are next to each other or separated out. So it's all about where things are and how they're set up and how they're arranged when we're talking about structure. It could also be things like, is the sentence very short? Is it very long? Is it compound? Is it complex? But it's all about how it's built rather than what it's made of. So it's not about the materials, it's not about the words themselves, it's about how they're put together. So if you're looking at a poem, what could you look at to talk about structure? Giselle said stanzas. Yes, so a stanza is like the, a paragraph in a in prose. It's the poem paragraph. It's just a group of lines. So you could look at how lines are grouped, and that would be structure. You could look at if the ideas from one stanza to the next changed, or the tone changed, or how many lines there are, or how short or long the lines are, or when that changes, when lines go from long to short, and if that's highlighting a shift in the poem or a different attitude or perspective. So the format. So, right, and that could include rhythm, that could include rhyme, but again, it's all about the organization. And so if you were looking at an argument piece, at an article, at an editorial, anything like that, what kinds of things could you look for or look at in terms of structure? Quote placement, so where are the quotes, or evidence, or how is that ordered? So how are the ideas ordered, like which come first, which come later? Where's the thesis? Are we building up to an argument or starting with an argument and then proving it? And what about a story? Whether that's a short story, a memoir, a novel, what kinds of things can you look at in a story to talk about structure? So again, remember, we're thinking about organization, about order, how things are put together. So it wouldn't be a matter of like what the setting is, but maybe does the author start with the setting, or does she start with the character description? And so that might tell you what's more important in this story, like the place or the person, like possibly. Are things happening in chronological order? Are they jumping around in time? Are we sticking with one character's perspective, or his point of view changing? Are chapters really short? Are they long? And why could that be? Same with paragraphs and sentences. With any of these, is there repetition of ideas or words? So all these things that are about how it fits together, the order, the arrangement, the organization, that's structure. So here's a question from Reading Assessment 2 that it's actually just about one sentence. So that's all you need to answer this. You don't have to go back and look at the full text. But it said, read the following sentence from paragraph 3. Harnessing the sun was a romantic idea that simply was not realistic. How does this sentence's structure best support the author's claim? And so I've got the 4 options they gave you below that question. And I want you to tell me how many of the 4 choices above deal with structure and which ones. So pretend I have those marked A, B, C, D. And just type in the chat box which choices deal with structure. I want everybody to do this. Which of these responses deal with structure? Because really, that's the first step to narrowing your options. Because if a response is going to answer that question, it's got to be talking about the structure of the sentence, not just the content or the idea. Okay, you all said A, and hopefully that was all independently and not just because you were looking at what the people before you typed. But yes, so A is the only one that says anything about structure, anything about the way words and ideas are arranged. So we've got the author contrasts the ideal goal with a practical argument. So that sentence starts with this ideal goal of harnessing the sun being a romantic idea, and then he says that it simply was not realistic. So he's contrasting the ideal goal with a practical argument in this sentence. And that contrast, like pointing out the contrast, is looking at structure. The other ones have nothing to do with structure. The author admits that the idea of solar power is desirable. Yes, he does that, but that doesn't say anything about how the sentence is structured. The author criticizes the idea of using solar energy. Yes, the author does that too, but that doesn't say anything about structure. The author believes that solar will work in the future, and that one's not even true, but again, it doesn't say anything about structure. Okay, so moving on to this poem. We're going to read it and discuss it a little bit and discuss the structure. So, but first I just want to read it and for you to be thinking about what is this about and how do you know? Could I get a volunteer to read, please?
I can read it.
Thanks, Giselle.
I love my land, but with a strange passion. My mind isn't able to absorb it yet. No glory purchased by the bloody actions, nor peace and proud confidence inlaid. No sacred sagas of the days of yore will stir my pleasant fancies any more. But I do love, and I don't know why, her endless plains, indifference and silence, her endless forests, ever-swaying wildness. Her rivers, floods, which, like the sea, are wide. I'd love to gallop in a cart on roads, and peering slowly through darkness of the nights, and idly dreaming of the night abodes. To meet the solemn hamlet's twinkling lights, I love the smell of the burnt-out stubble, the wagons sleeping in the steppe, and gleaming of the birches' marble, midst cornfields on the hillock steps, and with a joy that's little known. I see a full and stout barn, a cottage covered with straw, and shutters that are fairly done. And in the holly dewy evening, I'm glad to watch until midnight. The dancers fill the stamps and whistling to the murmur of the peasants' tight.
Thank you. So what is this about? Giselle said it's about how man loves the country's nature. Yeah, it's about a man who loves his country, and part of what he loves are he's like giving us all these images from nature. Can anyone add to that? Okay, we're going to read it again, but this time I want to break it down a little bit more. So I want you to be paying close attention to what you think the first 6 lines are about, and because it kind of shifts after that, and then what the rest of the poem is about, and how you would describe the structure of that, especially that second part of the poem. Sam says it's about surveying the land around you and adoring it, even if you don't have any immediate connections to the things around you. Okay, so hold up. I want us to read it aloud again while you're thinking about these things. So again, look at kind of the difference between the first set of about 6 lines and the rest of the poem. Who can read aloud? Rosa, will you read?
Sure. Okay. I love my land, but with a strange passion, my mind isn't able to absorb it yet. Nor glory purchased by the bloody actions, nor peace and proud confidence inlaid, nor sacred sags of the days of yore. Keep going, or right there.
Yep, keep going.
Will stir my pleasant fancies with way anymore, but I do love, and I don't know why.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to stop you there so we can talk about it. So, what's the feeling you get from these first few lines? What stands out in the first few lines? What's an image or word that really stands out? Lisette said bloody action. Yeah, that third line stands out to me, especially in the beginning of the poem, more than any other. So he loves his land, but with a strange passion. And he says, nor glory purchased by the bloody actions. What's he talking about? What would the bloody actions be? What could they be? Yeah, war. So he's talking about war. By the way, this is a Russian poet. It's like he's writing about Russia, his country in the 1800s. So what kind of way to talk about war is this? Glory, nor glory purchased by the bloody actions. Is this like a real patriotic, let's honor people's sacrifices way to write about war, or is there a different kind of tone or feeling you're getting from this? Glory purchased by the bloody actions. Yeah, I know, he's communicating how terrible war is. Sounds like he doesn't care for war. Does he sound like really excited about his country and the things they've done right here in this line? Do you think he thinks that it's like right or fair that you can purchase glory or land through bloodshed? No, yeah, it's a pretty negative line. And so you've got this poem that starts, I love my land, like my country, I love my land, but then he's bringing up some like not so great things about his country. In a pretty powerful way, like glory purchased by the bloody actions. And then if you skip down a few lines, he says, but I do love, and I don't know why. So we're back to, but I love this country. And then let's reread the rest of it. Rosa, would you keep reading, starting at her endless plains? And I want, while she's reading, I want you to be thinking about, like, how would you describe how this is organized or structured, the rest of this poem?
Okay. Her endless plains, indifference and silence, her endless forest, ever swaying wildness, her rivers, floods which, like the sea, are wide. I love to gallop in a car on roads and peering slowly through darkness of the nights and idly dreaming of the night. Oh, beat to meet the solemn hamlet's twinkling lights. I love the smell of the burnt out stubble, the wagons sleeping in the steep and gleaming of the breeches marble. Midst cornfields on the hillocks, steep steps, and with a joy that's little known, I see a full and stout barn, a cottage covered with straw and shutters that are fairly done. And in the holy dewy evening, I'm glad to watch until midnight the dances filled with stamps and whistling to murmur of the peasants' tight.
Thanks. So how would you describe the rest of this poem? What is it? What's it made up of? Jake said positives, yeah. Giselle, the land around him. Nadia said, is the structure like love and hate in a way? Maybe you could think about that like the first few lines are things he doesn't like about his country, and then the rest are things he really loves about the place and the land. Describing the beauty. So you guys are all correct. So what kind of language could you use to describe this in terms of structure? Like how are lines 7 through 26 structured? And don't even think in terms of like poetry words or rhythm or rhyme. Like what is this? How are lines 7 through 26 structured? How could you describe the structure? We've got the endless forest, the rivers, the plains, galloping in a cart, peering through the darkness, dreaming, twinkling lights, smell of burnt out stubble, those wagons sleeping. So there's a lot of sensory details. Sam's pointing out. And they're structured in a list. Like it's a list. It's a list of images. It's just one line after another of a sensory detail, an image that's something beautiful or meaningful to him about the land, about his country, about the countryside. So it's just like one image after another. So if you're going to talk about structure, you could call that a list, or you could point out the repetition, that he's repeating positive images. So the content is like these are details, they're positive, they're images. But talking about the structure is when you point out like, oh, this reads like a list, or there's a lot of repetition of images here. Does that make sense? Whoops, I wrote that privately. Give me a yes or no if that makes sense. And I'm just trying to point out that that's when it becomes talking about structure, when you're pointing out the positive images are repeating, or this reads like a list. It doesn't have to be a lot of, you don't have to use a lot of poetry terminology. You're just discussing and pointing out and noticing how things are ordered, how they're organized. Cool. Okay, so then this was the question that you were asked. How does the text structure contribute to the selection's meaning? What are the keywords in that question? What two things is the question asking you about? Well, it's kind of both, Sam. Like you still need to know what the words mean to get to, like if it makes sense how they're grouped or placed. But the second part is the more important part. It's where they are, how they relate to each other. And so this question, how does the text structure contribute to the selection's meaning? What are the two things you're being asked about here? I'll give you one because we've been talking about it, structure. But what's the other one? Yes, structure and meaning. So this question is asking you not just what the structure is, but how does the structure or an aspect of the structure of this poem contribute to its meaning? So to answer that, you have to know the meaning of the text first. So what is the meaning of this poem? What's the meaning of this poem? Sam, your answer makes sense, but don't forget about the topic. Like, what is the topic of this poem? What can still have beauty, or what does still have beauty? So Lisette said, beauty in his country. Yeah, this is really about his country. Like the title is My Country. So it's about how does he feel about his country? What's the word that repeats again and again and again in this poem? He loves it. This is a poem about love of country. Okay, it's about loving your country. And connected to what Sam pointed out, it's about loving your country, even though there might be some bad things about it, or some bad things in the history, or some bad things that have been done. It's about loving your country through the good and the bad. So here's a couple themes, like be loyal to one's country through the good and bad, love your country even when times are difficult. And this is clearly a poem about a guy who loves his country, and he says the word love at least five times. I might have missed one in it. But there's also a few like negative things he points out. So it's about loving your country through the good and the bad. So if that's the meaning, now we have to figure out how does the structure contribute to the meaning. And I'm going to go through each answer choice here in a different slide. And for each one, I just want you to first tell me, does this answer choice address both parts of the question? Does it deal with both structure and meaning? So the first one is the rhyme scheme helps readers visualize the events by emphasizing the sounds with rhyme. Does that deal with structure and meaning? Yes or no? Which one's missing? Yeah, there's nothing about meaning here. So you could talk about the rhyme scheme if you were talking about structure, but there's nothing in here about how that structure connects to or contributes to meaning. And it's just like a vague thing, like the rhyme scheme helps readers visualize the event by emphasizing the sounds with rhyme. It doesn't tell me anything. So forgive the typo here. Here's the next one. The solemn language signifies the poem's rhythm, expressing the confusion the speaker feels about his country. Does this deal with both structure and meaning? Okay, so it gets the meaning wrong, but I'm just asking if it deals with structure and meaning. The solemn language signifies the poem's rhythm. So solemn language, like that's not structure or meaning, but rhythm is. So there is a mention of structure here. But Jake, you're right. Like the answer itself doesn't make sense. Okay, so you're all correct that this is that this is a wrong answer. But it does mention structure and it mentions a meaning. So you'd have to dig into the answer more to figure out that it was the wrong answer. And Jake, you're right. Like it doesn't make sense. Like solemn language doesn't signify rhythm, and even if it did, the speaker's not confused. Like he loves his country. He's not confused about that. So it's the wrong answer. So it does kind of deal with structure and meaning, and you have to look at how it deals with the wrong structure and meaning to know that it's the wrong answer. Okay, and what about this one? The use of repetition portrays the speaker's fondness for his country through the images it creates. Yep, so we've got the repeating. It's talking about structure here because it's talking about repetition, the repeating of these positive images. And then it's got correctly that shows us that the speaker is fond of his country or that he loves his country. And that's key to the meaning of this poem. So that's our answer. And then the construction of one stanza shows a shift in time from defending the country in battle to the present day. This is another one that it doesn't really make sense. The fact that this whole poem is one stanza doesn't show us a shift, like, because it's all one stanza, like it. So that doesn't make sense. It would make more sense if this was a poem with multiple like groups of lines, and we could see how one was about a different idea than the other. Then you could talk about the stanzas, the structure of those, like showing some kind of change. But this one just doesn't fit. Okay. But notice too, like this one, it makes sense. It's just about repetition. This doesn't have to be really complicated. It's just making sure you understand the question and what it's asking. And so here's a sample writing prompt that went with this text. We're not going to write this essay, but I want to talk through how you would start it. In my country, the author mixes words with positive and negative connotations. Explain how these choices convey the poem's theme. Be sure to identify the theme and use examples from the text in your answer. What steps would you take to answer this? What would you have to do first to get ready to write this essay? Okay, so you want to find the words, like go back to the poem and find evidence. So what are some of the positive words the author uses? What are some of the negative words? What's the other big thing you have to know to start this essay? Yeah, you need to know the theme. Because what this is asking you to do is analyze how the author uses positive and negative words to express that people should love their country through the good and bad. And so in general, with an essay, most of you weren't at homeroom because you're not 9th and 10th graders. But in general, for any of the essays that you ever write, not only on this test, but like for me and in life, I'm gonna jump ahead. You need an introduction paragraph with a claim or a thesis, and body paragraphs that use and analyze evidence from the text to prove your claim or thesis, and a conclusion. So when you have a lot of time to plan and think, you know, you want to strive for that great hook, and you've know a lot about the text and the author, and you can include that background in your introduction. And those are all great, and you should try to do that. But if you're in a time situation and you just want to at least make sure you have the essentials down, that thesis is the most important thing, and then using evidence to prove your thesis. So with this prompt, you would figure out the theme, which we've already done. You would find those positive and negative words, like you've said, that you can connect to that theme, and then you would write your thesis. So some examples. I wrote 2 examples of a thesis you could do for this essay. One is in his poem, My Country, author Mikhail Lermontov contrasts words with positive and negative connotations to express that one should love his country through the good and bad. And that's really, it's a simple thesis. It kind of rewrites the prompt, and it uses the theme that came right off of one of the multiple choice questions. And that's okay. Like if I'm just need to get started, like that's fine. That would be a fine thesis. You could also try to get a little more sophisticated with it by being even more specific, which I do in my second one. In his poem, My Country, author Mikhail Lermontov uses a mix of somber language and nostalgic imagery to express that one's love of country runs deep and can defy logic. So I'm getting a little more deep with my theme there, and just a little more specific instead of positive and negative, using words like nostalgic and somber. But it's still the same thing, and either of those would be a fine thesis for this prompt. And so to prove that thesis, to prove that the author uses positive and negative words to express that you should love your country through the good and bad, what kind of evidence could you pull out of here? What are some of the negative words? What are some of the positive words? So strange passion, you could pull out. I would pull out as a negative, like, why are you calling your love of your country strange? Like, you could discuss that. Bloody definitely stands out as a negative word. Positive words. Love. And if you were going to be writing about love, you would definitely want to point out how that word repeats in the poem. Sam, I like endless and dances as positive words, like the kind of this endless nature and wildness, and then the dances and the whistling in that same line with the dances. You could talk about just the positive things he associates with his country. So there's lots of different evidence you could pick for this essay. The point is that you're singling out individual words and phrases and really discussing how they connect back to that theme, what kinds of emotions are associated with that word. All right. And now I wanted us to look at a different kind of writing prompt, just about, instead of about a poem or a fictional text, this one is about those solar articles that you read. And it's a little trickier to figure out what this one wants you to do. So I'm going to read the prompt, and then I want you to tell me, what is this essay asking you to do? What steps do you need to take? So compare and contrast a primary argument in each text you read regarding residential use of solar power. Your essay should explain how effectively you think each author supported that claim with reasoning and/or evidence. Be sure to use evidence from both texts in your answer. So what is this prompt asking you to do? How would you get started? Okay, so assuming you would have read these texts because you would have you have read them and you've answered some questions about them, but you might need to reread them because the very first thing you have to do and know to be able to answer this is what is the argument of each text? So what is the point of each text? What is the point the author is trying to make? So that's the first thing you need to know. And then what are you supposed to do beyond that? What does that second sentence ask you to do? So you're comparing and contrasting these two articles, but you're doing it from a really specific lens. And Sam said you're explaining which author was more effective. So you're really critiquing these two authors, and you're taking a position about which one did a better job proving their point. So you're critiquing these articles. So, knowing that, I want you guys to take a stab at writing a thesis for this essay. I gave you the name of the text and the authors if you want to use them, and I'll tell you generally the first article was about how solar power is the future, and the second article was about how solar power probably isn't going to happen because it's too expensive. But I just want you to write a thesis for this essay. Everybody. What could a thesis for this essay look like? So I need everybody to type something, even if you're not sure, at least like get started. Give me your opening phrase. What could this thesis sound like? If you're stuck, start with what Sam wrote and see if you would do something similar or change it. Lisette, Walker, Ariana, Layla, Salam, Nadia, Jake. Take a stab at this. Salam, Layla, Walker. Okay, good, thanks. I know this was hard, but I think it's more helpful to think through how you would do this on your own before I just tell you how to do it. And so, you guys had some good starts. The most important thing to know about this prompt, and any prompt like it, is that it is really asking you to take a side and not just say that both did a good job, but the better essay is going to say, like, this author proved their point better, and here's why. And so this essay is an argument. It's your argument about which author made the better argument and why. And so this is how I would do the thesis. And I didn't put in the titles I gave you or the full names because in my introduction, I would have already named the texts and introduced them and like briefly said what they were about in my introduction paragraph before I got to my thesis. And so then the thesis, here's an example of what I would write where it says example thesis. While Reyes argues that solar will soon dominate the energy market, Mueller uses statistics to more convincingly prove that fossil fuels will remain the more affordable option in the foreseeable future. And so if you look down below, here's kind of a template for what I did there. It's while one author claims this, like this argument, the other author more effectively points out their point. And so the idea is that the thesis kind of clearly and pretty concisely states what the two arguments in the two different texts are and makes my argument for which one did a better job. And so that's what the thesis, what you'd want to do. You'd want to clearly state the two authors' arguments so you could get past that point, because that doesn't need to be the focus of your essay. You just need to state what the two articles are arguing. And most of your essay is going to be you proving your point about which one did a better job with their argument. And so there's not necessarily a right side with an essay like this. Like you don't have to pick one article over the other as the better one. But in your body and your evidence and your analysis, you want to make sure that you're basing your position and your arguments on who proved their argument better, not on your personal opinion on the issue. So it's not about what you think about solar energy. It's about who used better evidence, better experts, more statistics, whose use of logic was better, things like that. So the structure of this could be just, an introduction. Maybe you have a hook about solar energy in the future, hopefully. Naming the two articles and what they were about. Then the thesis statement where you say which argument was better. And then your body paragraphs are you really digging into both those texts and saying, this is how the author tried to prove their point, and this is what they did well, and this is where their argument was weak. Does that make sense? Thanks, Sam. So, and because those are the two big things that this test and the standards want you to be able to do in terms of analyzing a text. Like you're either analyzing literature and really looking for the theme, the message, and how the author got there, using what kind of devices, what kind of words, what kind of structure and language, or you're looking at more nonfiction and argument type texts and analyzing the validity, the credibility, how they make their point and if they do a good job with it. All right, that's all I've got for you today. If you've got questions for me, please stick around. And if you don't, have a great rest of your week.